and welcome to my 2024 reading roundup. Okay, so it took a second because I wanted to make sure this worked. It's working. So let's start some stats. And I'm going to be right here because hopefully me in the future put stuff right here. But let's go. So these are the stats. I read a total of, so far, because I'm still reading and it's still 2024, I read a total of 17 books. What does that make up in like types? Is I read 7 physical books, 12 audiobooks, and 1 e-reader book. Some of these I did read in both kinds, so some of my physical copies I did read as an audio book as well, but it helped me to finish it. Also, I almost forgot, my goal this year was 12, so I beat that by 5, at least for now, because it's still 2024. But then let's break this down by the themes that I read, which was contemporary, literary, LGBTQIA+, science fiction, romance, horror, history, memoir, fantasy, middle grade, dystopian, technology, young adult, true crime, short stories, and politics. The last ones underneath fantasy were all, at least one of these books touched one or more of those topics. So it could be one book. I honestly think that the young adult, true crime, short stories, and technology and dystopian are from one book together. So, and we'll go through that in a second. From there, let's go into the ratings. Under 3 stars, 1 book. Books that I read that I gave a 3-star rating, 6. Books that I read that I gave a 4-star rating, 5. And how many 5-star reads did I read this year? 5. So that is the breakdown. If you noticed, so far, I've only read 1 book that I've given below a 3-star rating. What are some of these numbers? How do I break this down? Well, with the 17 books that I read this year, a total of physical pages read was 3,103 pages. The amount of hours I listened to in audiobooks were 82.45 hours, which equals out to 2 weeks of full-time work. And my average finish is 16 days. I do have 2 books that I have been reading for months, so that can help with how long it's taking me to finish. I haven't finished them yet. And my pace, so the books that I've read, their pacing has been 12% fast, 12% slow, and a majority of the books that I read, their technical pacing has been medium at 76%. What are the page number of books that I read? Like, what's the average length? It's roughly, with the lowest is 11% of the books that I've read are over 500 pages. The second lowest is under 300 pages. It's 33%, which is funny because it's a whole third. And the book length that is like the sweet length that I've been reading is 300 to 499 with 56%. And then with audio length, 38% of my reading is under 8 hours. And that makes sense because some of the short stories that I've been rereading are shorter than 8 hours. And the majority of the audiobook lengths that I've read so far have been 8 hours to 15 hours and 59 minutes, with that being 63%. And I also have noticed that 18% of the books I read is nonfiction, and 82% of the books I read is fiction. So it's interesting because growing up I used to read a lot more nonfiction, but this year I've made a mental note to try and read more fiction just to be more fun. And this is the interesting breakdown, is the format of books that I'm reading. Print is 35%, digital is 18%, and Audible is 47%. And by Audible, I mean Spotify, YouTube, any way I can listen to it. It's just Audible just sounds better. How did I reach this goal, you ask? From someone who went from reading barely any books last year to now having a goal of 12, 1 book per month, to now reading 17 as of right now, and still actively reading 3 books minimum, not including the ones I've spent months on. I have been reading either by buying physical books at bookstores. So I recently actually got a Barnes & Noble premium membership. I bought that last month when I bought my Nook. I'll talk about that in a second. And that has been my old way of reading up until recently. And a lot of the books that I read recently are majorly the last three. So, number 2 is, for the longest, I have been using Spotify for about, if you pay for their monthly subscription, you get roughly 10 to 11 hours of audiobook time. And it's a select library. Some of them are recent releases because I have been reading that. But this is how I did the majority of my listening. But since it's 10 to 11 hours, I have been running out of time a lot quicker. And because of that, within the last 2 months, since September or August, I realized that I ran out way too quickly and I still wanted to keep reading. So it's a good problem to have. I still wanted to read. But that meant that I needed to start looking into a new way to read. And for the past couple of years, I've been thinking about getting Audible or also getting a Kindle. And I've been thinking about this for years, but 1, never hit my goal, but never read. And 2, they're too expensive. I didn't want to have Prime. So, or I have Prime, but I didn't want to add to my Prime usage. So what I did is, right now, I have been using Audible, and I got a 30-day subscription, and I've read 2 books, or I've used one of my credits, and I've read roughly 3 books off of their plus category. So far, the book options are okay. I can see myself running out of space. But I've enjoyed it. And honestly, I really have enjoyed it. And I think I might keep using it, but I'll let you know. And number 4, my most recent thing that I've done is I bought an e-reader. I've wanted one for a long time. I had one when I was younger. And the reason why I don't have that one is because it was the original Nook. And I liked it, but it didn't work anymore. I think it broke when I was in high school. And I just never got another one. And I've been looking at Kindles forever, Kobos, and all these other things. But one thing I did know is I didn't really want to learn a new interface. I didn't really want to have a Kindle. Like, I wanted the most for it not to be. And I didn't want ads. And so, after looking and looking and looking, I thought about what actually worked for the longest. And my Nook did. I loved my Nook. And honestly, if I could just have my Nook be an old e-reader and the screen be good. So I went for it. So I got the glow light and I've been using it since, and I think I finished 1 book in less than a weekend, and I'm absolutely enthralled in another book, and that's how I've been falling asleep. Let's go into the meat of it. What are the books I read in 2024? Well, the first book I read, I finished in January of 2024 on the 22nd. It is called Buddha in the Attic by Julie Ototsuka. I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars. This was a physical book. And this was but earlier in this year, I did a book club video. If you want a full breakdown, there you go. But if anything, this was a very sad, depressing read. It was basically an amalgamation of stories of women who came from Japan during this time period right before World War II into World War II. And it basically broke down their life, how they felt, how they were treated, and, several trigger warnings. Do make sure you are mentally good to read this before you read it, but it was genuinely very good. My second book that I read was one that I had to read for my book club, and I did not like it. I tried. I think if this came out as a film, I would love it. I struggled to read this, but it's called Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I read this in both a physical and audiobook. This is when I needed an audiobook for, because it was exhausting for me to read. I don't like reading hardcover, so I think that's also a big problem. But I was happy to finally finish this after many, 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 many months of trying to read it. The concept is very interesting, honestly, so I'm not going to give too much there, but it's a very slow read. Like I said, I would love to see this in a movie or a series sped up, like faster pacing, because it's a good book. And so I gave this a 3.75 of 5 stars on Storygraph. I finished this on January 23rd, 2024. I started reading this book in September of last year. So, number 3, the third book I read was Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This was both a physical and an audiobook. This is where I realized that the lower percentage is books that are bigger. I do enjoy a long book, but to hold it when I'm reading hurts. So that's when I got far enough in my physical copy, I then switched over to an audiobook. And it was a good read with a lot going on. The writing was great, but in order to really get the story better, for me, I think I really should reread this again to make a good generalization. But off of a first read, 3.25 of 5 stars, and I finished this April 8th of this year. My fourth read, and this one kind of helped jump me back in. I think by the fourth read, I was doing a little better at reading, and it was Bad Mormon by Heather Gay. I loved this book. It was an audiobook. I loved listening to her read it. It was such a good read, very heartwarming and healing due to the fact that a lot of what she dealt with in her religion, I had some level of understanding and I felt it. And the last couple of chapters really made me choke up. And also, it has made me want to watch Desperate Housewives of Salt Lake City, I think it's called. But listen to this in an audiobook on Spotify. The earlier ones are all Spotify. And I gave this a 4.25 of 5 stars. I finished this April 27th. Now my fifth book. If Then something something somethings Simulatics something by Jill Lepore. This was a both physical and audiobook copy for me. I really enjoyed the topic. Very informative. Very interesting because from now on, that's all I think about when I see certain things, when I see marketing, when I see politics, when I see marketing in politics, when I see companies and how companies take up marketing and how they act and how they react to the audience. My only problem is that I understand that there's issues and certain times periods hitting in this book, but I think that you don't need to use certain languages to convey the message, and so that's why I dropped the rating. If you don't know, read the reviews. But because of that, 3.75 of 5 stars, and I finished this May 6th, 2024. My sixth book was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This was a physical book, and this was my first 5 out of 5 star read this year. This was last month's book club, so if you want to go into more specifics, just check that out. And if anything, one thing I will say is that I started reading this during a very grateful part of my personal life that I was dealing with, and it really helped me sort through my grief and push forth. So, beautiful story, and also light at times. 5 out of 5 stars. Finished it July 2nd, 2024. And then is my 7th book. This is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Audiobook. Listen to it on Spotify. This book was interesting by the premise, but it was not my cup of tea. But it was turned into a show, so I know that in order for that to have happened, a good amount of people must have liked it. I think I might not like the genre, but who knows? I'll give it more tries. I don't really have any notes on this book, since I didn't really write anything about it, I was just proud that I finished it. And this one was my lowest rating of the year, of 1.75 stars out of 5. And I finished this June 19th of 2024. And now is my 8th book, Revenge by Yoko Ogawa. I think I read an earlier book of hers. I think this author wrote Memory Police. I loved that book. And so I physically picked up this copy in Barnes & Noble. It's 11 short stories, and they were all very interesting and enjoyable. I like how all of the stories are kind of intertwined, so that maybe if you're getting bored by some of them, because I did get bored by some of them, you still have to pay attention, because then you hit a point in a different story that you're like, oh, what? That one and that one intertwined. So I will say my favorite part of this book, my favorite short story, is the one about the fruit juice, I think it was. And it was a girl who asked a other kid to go with her to meet her dad. That's all I'll say. And that book, I gave it a 3.25 of 5 stars. And I finished it on 7-Eleven. Okay. And now is my 9th book. This 9th book was Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Barezia. This was a physical book. One thing I wrote down on this review was, wow. Wow. Lightning McQueen. Well, first, I would hate to be part of this world if you have read it. But this book is very, very, very well written, in my opinion. And it almost pulls you in almost immediately. That's what it did to me. And also, very, very, very heavy trigger warning. So please make sure you're good when reading this. But the world building in this was great. It's such a short read. And at the end, the twist, my jaw was dropped. Genuinely. And also, this is the one book that I ended up reading in one day. So, take with that as you will. 5 out of 5 stars. July 22nd, 2024 is when I read this book. I finished reading. And then is my 10th book, Remarkably Bright Creatures. This was an audiobook I read on Spotify. I'm sorry if you're thinking, if I'm saying audiobook, audible, they sound the same to me. But this was an audiobook. This was a 3-part story, or not 3-part, but it was the story of 3 different people. So it was told by the narration of 3 different people. It was a elderly lady, a younger man, and a octopus. And it talks in their story, in their like headspace, and eventually their lives all cross. But extra point, because this book was set near Seattle, and I'm obsessed. So yeah. I loved how the story was laid out. I like how the characters naturally cross each other, and it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like it needed to happen. It just happened. And without spoiling anything, it's a very heartwarming read. And then is my 11th book. This book, I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. Audiobook, Spotify. So good. Good. I read this book as I saw it on Spotify. It was recommended to me. I listened to it so quickly, and I wish I can go back into this world. I wish I could just live in it. I can't believe this is the author's first book that I can tell, because I wanted to buy this book in physical copy and to have it on my bookshelf, and I can't find it anywhere near me. I loved this book. It was so good. It was so intriguing, and I flew through it. Honestly, without adding any spoilers, I also would like to do a book club video to this book, so if anyone's watching. But just think, New Girl meets the Mick, with a dash of Warhammer. If you know, if you know. If you know, you know. Yes, I have to take a deep breath in between every single book I do because I talk too much without breathing. So, this is the 12th book I read this year. So, this should have been my last book of the year if I was just trying to do 12, but I didn't. And it was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was a Spotify book, I think, yeah. And this audiobook was book that I read because I was just generally really interested in. Oh, also, I never said anything about when I finished that other book. September 17th, 2024, 5 stars. I hope this finds you well by Natalie Sue. Sorry, I forgot to state that. Okay, so The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I have always loved Greek mythology. It's very interesting. It's intriguing. So this was an interesting read. With this read, I learned about, or we all learned about the goddess Thetis for the first, well, me. I learned about the goddess Thetis for the first time and how her son Achilles impacted the Trojan War. This book is the voice of Achilles. He's a servant / partner who was the son of a king who vanished him due to killing another kid. And when he was a kid, they ended up training together. Achilles' servant, I forget his name. He has an attitude, and eventually, I don't know why Achilles wanted him as his partner, but between them and down low of them being together, but almost everybody knows. It's like they know, but they're not going to say anything. But the whole story happens right before the Trojan War to the end of the Trojan War. That's all I'm going to say. But Achilles' son, you're an SOB. That's all I'm going to say. 4 out of 5 stars. Finished September 23rd, 2024. And then I read A Stolen Life. A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard, my 13th book, on Spotify. Yes, on Spotify. One thing I will tell you, yet another trigger warning. When I was a child, a very young teen, I was growing up in the time of Casey Anthony, J.C. Dugard. This was like a thing. I know it was happening beforehand, probably, but this is what I remember. I remember hearing about J.C. Dugard. I was terrified about her story. It was terrifying to me as a kid. Like, this was my kukui. And I remember hearing from other adults and other like older people about her story, and it was terrifying. This was my first time reading this book this year. Heavy trigger warning. I waited a really long time to read this book because I know it would be a hard and emotional read, because as a child, her story was terrifying to me. And I know that some reviews that I saw, people complain about how simple of a read it is, but I think that's what's the scary part of it, because this was an 11-year-old girl who was taken, and I think that the simpleness of the way that the book was written is kind of depressing and sad and scary and terrifying, because like this could have been you. But such a well done book. And JC, if you're listening, I'm so sorry that happened to you. 4.5 stars out of 5. Finished this September 26, 2024. 14th book, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I've seen this book pop up in my recommended for a while on Spotify. I chose not to read it because I chose to read J.C. Dugard. I ran out of space in my Spotify, so then I used Audible. And I loved this book. This book was amazing. It hit close to my life. I loved it. The story is very rom-com, but also on so many levels. I feel like it had a drama and a sad aspect to it, though, too. without going too detailed in it, and it's just like you learn about a lot of the ongoings in the two people who tell you about their life, Justin and Emma, and from their point of view and how everything's going. And I just loved that. And maybe because of that, because I don't want to go into too much review, look forward to it as a book club book. 5 out of 5 stars. Just finished it October 3rd, 2024. My 15th book was The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. This was a audiobook, actually. Was an audible book. In my opinion, is it weird that I liked the Amazon show more than I liked the book? I think maybe it's because I watched the show first. But this is one of the first books I've read after watching the show/movie, and I didn't really care for it. It's also my first Jenny Han book I've read. The book was okay, but I think it was just as times the structure of it was a little more messier than the way it was structured in the show, in my opinion. And it was a really fun read. And a nice way to revisit the show without rewatching the show, but just, my thoughts. 3.75 of 5 stars. I finished this October 7th of 2024. Okay. 16th book. Among the Hidden by M.P. Haddix. Audiobook. I read this book as a child, the series, roughly about 20 years ago. I'm a little old. Just a little. I loved this book as a kid. It was spooky, it was scary, it was dystopian. I actually really enjoyed this book, rereading it. And it was kind of spooky of an idea of the way that the world was built. But as I reread it, I did enjoy the story, and I know that it's not catered to me, someone in their late 20s, but I did catch some moments when the book, I feel like the story wasn't fully thought out, and there were holes, but it was a fun read. So 3.75 stars of 5. Finished it on October 8th of 2024. And this is my last read of the year so far, because I'm still reading 3 books. 5 if you include the 2 that I have been sitting on. Cover Story by Susan Rigetti. This was my first e-reader book. This story was really, 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 really fun. Like, think of Devil Meets Prada meets Anna Delvey. Fun. I flew through this book. I read it in a weekend, which is pretty good since it was taking me forever to read physical books. But yes, there are some plot holes. The holes are in the plot, as I say a second time. But I feel that the way that I flew through the book and how interested I am, and not the 1, but 2 plot twists, I was grasping at my neck. Like, girl, wow. Just wow. You should read it. 5 out of 5 stars. Finished at 10/10, 2024. What are my goals for next year? 2025. Even though I'm still reading some books. But I'm too excited to make this video, so I'm making it now. Books on my TBR are the 2 books that I am reading actively right now. I do have books on my wish list on my Nook, but I do not count them because I have not bought them. I will not buy them until I finish a book in the book on my Nook. I'm reading 1 book at a time on there. And more importantly, what is my goal? Number of books to read for 2025. Last year, my book goal was 12. And as of today, I understand that I've read 17 books total, and I'm still finishing out 2 to 3 books, but I have a lot of stuff on my plate. And I don't want to overwhelm myself, and I don't want to fully push too hard, because even though I might finish off maybe with 20 books this year, I don't want to jinx it. I want to make it realistic, and I want to make it more than my goal was last year. And maybe if I do it 2 years in a row, maybe I'll give myself a bigger goal. But my goal for 2025 is 15 books. I hope I can get it. Hopefully I don't fall off on my optimism. But I really have enjoyed reading. See you guys next time. Bye.